I kept one secret from my new wife, and 60 days later, that secret was the only thing standing between me and losing everything I had spent 30 years building. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 64 years old, I live in Savannah, Georgia, and 18 months ago I made the mistake of falling in love too quickly. Or maybe it wasn't love at all. Maybe it was loneliness wearing love's clothes. After my wife Margaret passed from cancer 3 years ago, the house got so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in every room. My daughter Claire kept calling, kept checking in, kept saying, "Dad, you don't have to be alone," and I kept telling her I was fine. But I wasn't fine. I was disappearing a little bit every day. Margaret and I had built something real together. 31 years of marriage, 2 kids, a grandchild on the way when she got sick. We had started with nothing. I was a machinist, and she was a school librarian, and we had been careful, disciplined, patient. By the time she passed, we owned our home outright, had a rental property across town on Whitaker Street, and I had a retirement account that could carry me comfortably for the rest of my life. We had also, quietly and without telling anyone, purchased a small commercial building downtown that we leased to a barber shop and a tax preparation office. Margaret had insisted on that one. She said, "Walter, real estate is the only thing that works while you sleep." She was right about most things. After she was gone, I kept all of it running. I managed the properties myself, handled the leases, did the maintenance I could, and hired out the rest. It gave me something to do. It gave me a reason to get up. But it was a hollow kind of purpose, and I knew it. I met Denise at a charity dinner for the Savannah Food Bank. She was sitting 2 seats down from me, laughing at something the man beside her had said, and when she turned and caught me looking, she didn't look away. She was 58. Recently divorced, warm in the way that some people are warm, like a fire you want to stand next to. We talked for 3 hours that night. I drove home thinking about her the whole way. What I did not tell Denise, not that night and not for a long time after, was the full picture of what I owned. I told her I was retired, which was true. I told her I had a house in Savannah and that I kept myself busy. I did not mention Whitaker Street. I did not mention the commercial building downtown. I said I had done all right for myself, which was an understatement, but I said it carefully, the way a man says it when he has learned that money changes things. Margaret had always warned me about that, too. She used to say, "The moment people know what you have, they start seeing the asset and not the person." I had watched it happen to friends. I was not going to let it happen to me. Why did I hide it? That is a question I asked myself many times in the months that followed. The honest answer is that I had seen what happened to my friend Raymond when he remarried. His second wife was charming and attentive right up until the day they signed the papers, and within 4 months she had talked him into refinancing his house to invest in her brother's business. Raymond lost $60,000 and nearly lost the house itself. I watched him sitting on my porch one evening, a proud man made small, and I swore I would never put myself in that position. So when Denise and I started getting serious, I kept the financial details vague, not dishonest exactly, just incomplete. She knew I was comfortable. She knew I owned my home. She did not know the rest. We dated for 8 months. They were good months, genuinely good. She made me laugh in a way I had forgotten I could laugh. She liked to cook Sunday dinners, and she would call me Saturday night to ask what I was hungry for. She was attentive and kind, and I started to believe that I had been wrong to be so guarded. I started to think that maybe Margaret's caution did not need to apply to everyone. My daughter Claire met Denise twice during those 8 months. Both times, she was polite, but quiet in a way that I recognized. Claire is not a quiet person. When she goes quiet, she is thinking hard about something she does not yet want to say. After the second dinner, she pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Dad, I like her. I just think you should take your time." I told her we were taking our time. She nodded slowly and said, "Okay, just okay." I should have asked her what she meant. Denise also had a son. His name was Brandon, and he was 32 years old, recently out of a job he described vaguely as in logistics, and living, as of 6 months before I met Denise, back in her apartment. She mentioned him casually, the way you mention a piece of furniture that has always been there. She said he was between opportunities and that he was a good kid who had just hit a rough patch. I took her at her word. I met Brandon for the first time about 4 months into dating Denise. We had dinner, the three of us, at a restaurant on Bay Street. He was polite enough at the table, but there was something underneath the politeness that I could not quite name. He asked me questions that seemed friendly, but felt like an inventory. What did I do before I retired? Did I still have any business interests? Was my house paid off? I answered the way I had practiced. General, comfortable, nothing specific. He smiled and nodded. Denise looked proud of him. I drove home uneasy and could not explain why. We got engaged in October. I told myself I was ready. I told myself that 8 months was enough time to know someone. I told myself that Claire's quiet concern was just the natural protectiveness of a daughter who had lost her mother too soon. I bought a ring. I got down on one knee in the garden behind my house, the garden Margaret had planted 20 years ago, and Denise said yes with tears running down her face. I believed in that moment that I had made the right decision. We married in January, small ceremony, close family, and a handful of friends. Claire was there. She hugged Denise, and she hugged me, and she whispered in my ear, "I love you, Dad. Please be careful." I kissed her on the forehead and told her everything was going to be fine. 36 days later, I was sitting at my kitchen table, wondering how I had been so blind. It started on day 3 of the marriage. Not day 30, not day 10, day 3. Denise and I were having coffee in the morning, and she said, almost as an aside, "Brandon is going to need to stay with us for a while, just until he gets back on his feet." I set my mug down. I said I had not known that was the plan. She said it was not a big plan, it was just family helping family, and didn't I believe in family? I said of course I did. She said good, because he would be moving in at the end of the week. I want you to understand what my house is. It is a 4-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood that I have owned for 22 years. Margaret picked out the paint colors. My son James's handprints are in concrete on the back patio from when he was 7 years old. Every room in that house has a memory in it. And by day 3 of my second marriage, it was already being offered to someone else without my agreement. I said I wanted to talk about it more before we decided. Denise's face changed. Not dramatically, not a scene, just a small shift, like a door closing quietly. She said, "I thought we were partners now. Partners discuss things." I agreed that they did, which was why I wanted to discuss it. She said she did not see what there was to discuss. He was her son. This was now her home, too. By the end of that week, Brandon was sleeping in my guest room. He was not a bad house guest in the obvious ways. He kept his room reasonably tidy. He said please and thank you. But he moved through my house with a familiarity that unsettled me, opening cabinets, going through the garage, walking the property line one afternoon with his hands in his pockets like a man calculating acreage. I watched him from the kitchen window and felt something cold move through me. Then came the conversation that changed everything. It was a Sunday evening, about 3 weeks after the wedding. Denise and I were sitting in the living room, and Brandon was at the table behind us, on his laptop. Denise turned to me and said in a gentle, reasonable voice, "Walter, Brandon has found a business opportunity, a food truck. He has the contacts, he has the plan, he just needs some startup capital to get going. I said that sounded interesting. She said, we were thinking maybe $50,000 to start. I kept my face still. I have a talent for that, developed over 64 years of life and 31 years of marriage to a woman who could read a room better than anyone I ever knew. I kept my face still, and I said, that's a significant investment. She said, yes, but family invests in family. Brandon looked up from his laptop and gave me a smile that did not reach his eyes and said, I'd pay you back with interest, Walter. First name, 32 years old and calling me by my first name. I said I would think about it. That night, after Denise was asleep, I sat in my study for a long time. I thought about Raymond. I thought about Claire's quiet face at that kitchen table. I thought about Brandon walking my property line. And then I thought about something I had never mentioned to Denise, something she did not know and had no reason to know. All of my properties, the house, Whitaker Street, the commercial building downtown, were held in a trust. Margaret had insisted on it years ago for estate planning purposes. The trust named me as trustee and Claire and James as beneficiaries. Denise was not on the trust. Denise had no access to those assets, no claim, no visibility. I had not lied about this. I had simply never brought it up. The next morning I called Claire before Denise was awake. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Dad, I need to tell you something I saw. She told me that the week before the wedding, she had run into a woman at her gym who knew Denise from a neighborhood they had both lived in years ago. This woman had said carefully that Denise's divorce had not been simple, that her ex-husband had accused her of financial manipulation, and that the divorce settlement had been contentious. Claire had not wanted to tell me before the wedding because she did not know if it was true, did not want to hurt me, and had hoped she was wrong. She was not wrong. I called my attorney that same morning. His name is Gerald, and he has handled my legal affairs for 15 years. I told him the situation. He asked me if Denise had been added to any accounts or any properties. I told him no, nothing had changed since before the wedding. He said, Then you are in a protected position. She has no legal claim to the trust assets. Your personal accounts are the only exposure. I had approximately $12,000 in a joint checking account that we had opened for household expenses. That was all she could reach. Gerald told me to document everything, every conversation about money, every request, every statement Brandon had made. I went home and wrote it all down, dated and detailed. 3 days later, Denise brought it up again. This time Brandon was sitting at the table with us, which I noticed. She said they had talked more about the food truck and they really felt this was the right moment. She said she knew 50,000 felt like a lot, but that she had been thinking, and surely I had more resources than I had let on, a man who owned his home outright and had rental income had to have savings. She said it with a smile, but she was watching my face very carefully. I said, Denise, I have to be honest with you. My assets are structured in a way that makes large cash transfers complicated. Most of what I have is held in a trust, and I cannot move that money without a formal process and approval from my co-trustee. I watched her expression as I said it. The warmth went out of her eyes like a light switching off. It happened in less than a second, and then she rebuilt the smile, but I had seen it. She said, What trust? You never mentioned a trust. I said, You never asked. The weeks that followed were cold in a way that had nothing to do with the Georgia winter. Denise stopped making Sunday dinners. Brandon stopped saying please and thank you. There were conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. One evening I came home to find Denise on the phone in the bedroom with the door closed, and when she came out, she said it was her sister. I had met her sister once. Her sister lived in Phoenix, and they called each other on birthdays. I had a second conversation with Gerald. I told him I wanted to understand my options. He walked me through them carefully. He said that Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which means that in a divorce, the court divides marital assets fairly but not necessarily equally, and that assets held in a pre-existing trust are generally protected as separate property. The joint checking account would likely be split. Nothing else. He asked me how I wanted to proceed. I told him I wanted to be sure before I did anything. He said he understood. The moment that made me sure came on a Tuesday evening in late February. I came home from running errands and found Brandon in my study. Not the living room, not the kitchen. My study, where I keep my files. He was standing at my desk, and when I came in, he turned around without even looking embarrassed and said, "I was looking for a pen." There was a drawer open behind him. It was not the drawer where I keep pens. I said, "Brandon, I need you to leave my study." He looked at me for a moment with that smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Sure, Walter," and walked out. I went to Gerald's office the next morning. I told him I was ready. The conversation I had with Denise that evening was one of the hardest things I have done in my life, and I have done hard things. I sat down across from her in the living room, and I told her that I did not believe our marriage was working. I told her that I had felt, from very early on, that there were expectations being placed on me that had not been discussed before we married. I told her that I cared about her, but that care alone was not enough to sustain a marriage that had started to feel like a negotiation. She did not yell. That surprised me. She sat very still, and then she said, "Is this about the money?" I said it was about honesty, which money was a part of. She said I had not been honest either, that I had hidden what I owned, that she would not have married me if she had known I was going to be so withholding. I said I was sorry she felt that way. Brandon moved out the following weekend. Denise moved out 10 days after that. She went to stay with a friend, and then, according to what I heard through mutual acquaintances, she went to Phoenix to stay with her sister. The divorce was final 4 months later. She received half of the joint checking account, which was about $6,000. The house, Whitaker Street, the commercial building, none of it was touched. Margaret's trust held. I called Claire the day the papers were signed. She answered on the first ring, the way she always does when she knows I might need her. I told her it was done. She exhaled and said, "I'm so glad, Dad." She asked if I was okay. I told her I was something between okay and relieved, and that I wasn't sure what to do with the space between those two things. She said, "You sit with it, and then you call me for dinner." I sat on my back porch that evening and looked at the garden. It was March, and the first things Margaret had planted were starting to come back the way they always did. The knockout roses along the fence, the gardenia by the gate. They came back every year without being asked. I had always found that comforting. I thought about what I had learned and what I wished I had done differently. I wish I had listened more carefully when Claire went quiet. I wish I had asked more questions earlier, not out of suspicion, but out of the kind of honest curiosity that real love requires. I wish I had been willing to have the difficult conversation about finances before the wedding rather than after, because that conversation, uncomfortable as it is, tells you everything you need to know about who you are dealing with. And I thought about the trust, about Margaret insisting on it 20 years ago when I had thought it was unnecessary paperwork. She had said, "Walter, we are building something. We owe it to our children and to each other to protect it properly." I had signed the papers and forgotten about them. She had been right, the way she was right about most things, and she had protected us both even from a future she never got to see. What I know now, at 64, sitting in the garden of a house that is fully mine, is this: Trusting someone with your heart and trusting someone with everything you have built are two different decisions, and they do not have to happen at the same time. Caution is not the same thing as coldness. Protecting yourself is not the same thing as refusing to love. You can open your life to someone while still keeping certain doors appropriately locked until you know, really know, who is standing on the other side. I also know that the people who are in your life for the right reasons do not disappear when they learn the money is protected. Claire did not love me any differently after she knew everything. My son James called me every week through all of it, and never once asked about the trust or the properties or what any of it meant for his inheritance. He just asked how I was doing. That is the difference. And once you have felt that difference, you do not forget it. There are days when the house is still too quiet. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But I am also not going to let the quiet talk me into something I am not ready for. When and if I open that door again, I will open it slowly, with my eyes all the way open and my daughter's number ready to call. Margaret used to say that wisdom is just pain that finally started teaching. I think she was right about that too.